Hi creatives, happy November. My name is Lauren if you're new here with Lauren Elizabeth Animal Art, and I help creatives master technique and find their style in animal art. Now, after posting a poll on YouTube asking you guys what kind of content would be the most helpful for you right now, and majority of you said improving pet fur. So that's what we're going to talk about in this tutorial, specifically for medium to long length pet fur. Now I know I'm using this little mouse, but it's really up close and I really think you'll get a good view and description as I'm walking you through my process, teaching you the why and the how of creating this realistic looking fur using abstract colors, a method that I find so much more freeing, fun, and creative. Now, if you missed the last video I posted on YouTube about creating realistic, colorful dog portraits, this actually is a review and builds from that tutorial. So I have that linked in the description, but guys, without further ado, let's get started. Now, something I discovered at the beginning, if you get full coverage in that base layer, those top layers will be that much more pigmented, rich, and far easier to paint in details. But when I'm working with medium and long fur, okay, so not short fur, and I consider this mouse having medium straight length fur, I begin to lay down those lines even in that first layer. So not only am I testing out the value that I think I'm seeing in the reference photo, just like I taught in that dog painting video linked below, I'm also laying down thick lines placed very closely together, nearly over top one another to cover up that white, much thicker than the lines we'll be placing on the top layers. And I'm beginning to get the fur characteristics down. I teach something in the fur course of my masterclass called the 5 components of fur. These 5 components, and I'll relate it back to this mouse, is the length. I would say this is more medium to short length fur. Next is the direction that the fur is laying. So on this mouse, as I'm working on the left side, the fur is slightly pointing down and to the left. Next is color. Now, of course, that's the color of the fur, but if you're like me, you go by both color and color value. So the actual color, in this case, it's a brown and light and dark tans. And then there's the abstract colors that I'm also applying, and those are the pinks, the yellows, the violets. What guides me on the abstract colors is the color value, how light or dark an area is. Then the 4th component is texture. We don't have wavy fur here. We don't have curly fur here. This little mouse has very straight, medium length, reasonably thick, not so much on the face fur. And lastly, patterns and or markings in the fur, which in this case we have none. But when we don't have markings or any patterns to work with, we can certainly take full advantage of the strong shadows and the strong highlights. On the flip side, I find it not only boring, but very challenging to paint a pet where the light is covering the entire animal and we don't have shadows or markings. Now here's where I'm really gonna build from the video I mentioned, the dog painting video. That video I talk a lot about how I separate values into dark, medium, and lights. Now that's a space where beginners can sit for a long time and really understand what a dark, what a medium, and what a light value is. But once you've developed an eye for those values, then you begin to start to see the in-betweens. There's dark to medium values, so it sits between the dark and the medium value. You also start to notice the values that sit between the medium and the light values. They're not quite light, and they're also not a medium value, but they're right there in between. So as you can see me demonstrating right now, as I'm laying down these very clustered, closely together lines in the correct direction, the correct length, testing out the color that I think I'm seeing and the value that I think I'm seeing in the reference, if it's too light, I just add a bit more of the raw sienna or my violet. Those are my darker, more dominant colors in this case. But if it's too dark, I then blend in some light pink, or I blend in some light yellow. I very often don't get it right the first time. I have to do a lot of tests, but luckily, the very beginning, as you can see, kind of looks a little sloppy. It looks a little ugly. This is that normal ugly phase. It doesn't stay like this the whole time, but for the majority of it, honestly, And lucky for us with acrylics, we can paint over any mistakes. We can also redo layers to adjust the value. I say the foundation just has to be strong, it doesn't have to be pretty. But it's when we have the white of our canvas or paper covered up at this point, when the layers over top, those second, those third, those fourth, those fifth layers, get a little bit smaller, finer, more controlled with our hand. So what that really means is that we're adding more ranges of values to better connect the dark with the medium and the light value. So it's this gradual progression from dark to medium to light. This gets rid of that blocky choppiness and makes it look like more realistic fur, just in more abstract colors. Secondly, we're adding more fur lines, just following those 5 components so it looks like a furry animal. And we're trying to not cover up the bottom layers, but make sure that we can still see them from the bottom unless we have to redo them, and getting those lines just thin enough so we can see them. So that's definitely the part that takes practice, takes a bit of skill. I'm using my absolute smallest liner brush from my favorite, everybody knows I love Arteza. This is from the detail brush pack that I also have linked down below. And this allows me to get those really fine lines. I'm only loading paint just a small amount on the tip of my brush. And as soon as my dots or lines start to get too thick, I wash up my brush and then pat it damp. So it's not sopping wet, but it's still moist the whole time I'm painting. Hi creative, sorry to interrupt, but a huge goal of mine has been to help at-risk pets, animals, and children. So that's why I've partnered with 4 Paws bracelets. I just love what they're doing so much because they're feeding these displaced pets and animals that are overwhelming these shelters and rescues, which are running out of food. So they feed these animals so that these rescues have more funds to put towards medical care and finding them a forever home. So what I'm doing is the next 4 people to order from my Etsy shop get one of these bracelets, these stone beautiful bracelets that are handmade with their order. Now I'm hoping to beat the rush so that you can get this in time for Christmas. I have bags, I have notebooks, I have my fine art prints, and even some tiny magnet originals. I have a link to my shop down below along with that charity, but without further ado, let's get back to it. Now here's something you can do when you have some values that are just so hard to get, when you've been working it and you're actually afraid that you're gonna overdo it. Pause from that furry animal, don't do any more fur, and work around it on any areas that are touching the animal or close by that can not only give your eyes a break, but also help you compare and contrast values better. That really helped me when I started working on the branch here, the berries, and the pine cones especially. This is where a lot of artists get stuck. They feel overwhelmed, but as long as you take that next right step, the second step will reveal itself. So just after doing that little bit of branch, I was able to figure out a few more things to do on the mouse's fur, and then I moved on to the pine cones. Now here's another way that you can really make that fur eye-catching and stand out. Now I'm a big fan of creative backgrounds. It's a way that I like to stand out in this really oversaturated pet portrait field and wildlife art. And so that's actually, I use different tactics in my backgrounds to draw the animal forward. Creative backgrounds that complement that animal instead of compete and take away from it. And that is to use complementary colors. Now, I'm not going to show you the whole footage of how I painted the pine cones and the cherries and a few other details. That's actually in my original Animal Artist course. That is a monthly course and challenge for animal artists of any medium, not just acrylics. So the tactic is using complementary color violet to draw out the yellows in this mouse. I added lots of yellows and light pinks for the highlights in the fur. Now, another tactic that I teach in this course is using contrasting lines and shapes. Unlike those fine straight lines that we used for the fur of this mouse, I'm using thick curving lines that almost make a semicircle over and over again right next to the mouse for the pine cones. I'm exaggerating those shapes a bit. I'm actually kind of doing my own thing, just taking hints and cues about the shape and the color and the value and making it my own. Now to pull this little mousie out of the ugly phase, I'm gonna do these steps. I've covered a few, but this is what I'm doing over and over and over again until I get it just right. I wanna add a range of values in the form of fine lines. So a range of values means multiple different dark values. They can be brown in this case, they can also be a dark violet, they can be a mix of the two. I'm also want a range of medium values, so a wide range of joiner values that help me join the darks with the lights. And I also want a range of light values, so a lot of ranges of light yellow, light pink, even light lavender in this case. So the colors I mix up are not exactly identical to the base colors I applied, they are similar. It's the values that are alike, so how light or dark a color is. I want to also overlap those medium values just right so they help me to join the darks with the very light values. You also want those lines over top to just have just light gaps so that you can see those bottom layers. So I'm adding just the smallest little gaps so you know that there's darker and medium values beneath it. And last but not least, this is where you can redo and layer more fine lines over top. Again, this is a very slow process. It's line after line after line. Guys, all I'm doing here is just applying lines placed in the right spots of the right value, ever so carefully. I've seen so many artists give up too soon. They're doing the right things, but not for long enough. It just takes quite a bit of patience, take some breaks in between, and know that you can do this. You really can do this. But if you're still feeling discouraged and maybe a bit overwhelmed because you have a lot of pet commissions to complete, I have something called the Master Animal Fur course. This is in my new and improved Pet Portrait Masterclass, previously called the Online Animal Art Masterclass. There's not just step-by-step tutorials in this class, there's also in-depth courses like this Master Fur course that covers my 5-step fur painting process, proper brush technique, and 8 common fur types, helping students learn how to properly identify the fur type and execute it. And in the process, you not only create realistic animal fur, but using abstract colors in a very freeing, low-stress, creative way. Now, if you want to learn more about my new and improved Pet Portrait Masterclass, I have a link to that in the description. But my last and final tip, something that I do at the very end, is I draw out those accent colors. Now, even from the beginning, as I'm laying down all these layers and adjusting values, there's these beautiful surprise colors that pop up, and then there's the abstract colors that I'm intentional with and that I plan to use. So at the very end, in this phase right here, when I'm almost past the ugly phase, I mix up almost identical colors to those beautiful colors I want to pull out, and I reapply them in the form of very clean, fine lines. Little dabs and hints here and there, not too much, but just enough to give more color and add more interest to the animal. I'm all about just finding ways to add more color and creativity to my animals and the backgrounds. All right, creatives, so there you have it. Please let me know in the comments down below more ways that I can help you, more content that I can put out on my channel. I hope you have a fabulous day. Bye.